The Anti-Defamation League has long branded itself as this kind of pro-civil liberties, pro-civil rights, anti-discrimination organization. It was long perceived as kind of a standard liberal civil rights group. It has long ceased being that. Of course, it was formed as well to combat anti-Semitism, but believed all those other causes I just mentioned were connected to that cause. None of that is what the ADL does anymore. The Anti-Defamation League is basically nothing more than a pro-Israel organization. Doesn't even care about anti-Semitism as long as you're pro-Israel. But mostly what it has become is one of the leading and arguably, I would say, the most effective censorship organizations in the United States, succeeding like nobody else in getting people silenced and removed and deplatformed and banned. And not just that, but operating at a higher level order of censorship where they were a major player in the ban of TikTok and the forced sale of it to people who were loyalists of Israel. They have been working hard to get legislation requiring punishments for big tech companies if they allow what the ADL considers to be anti-Semitism, which of course means criticism of Israel. And earlier today, the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, Jonathan Greenblatt, went before a synagogue and argued that several of the most influential and well-watched voices who are critical of Israel in the United States ought to be censored. And he specifically singled out Tucker Carlson, Hasan Piker, Nick Fuentes, and Candace Owens. Let me first show you what he said, but then show you the history of the last several years leading up to how the ADL has built itself into an organization that basically dictates the limits of speech for American citizens, at least when it comes to Israel and Jews. Here's, first of all, what Jonathan Greenblatt said today.
Jonathan, can you comment on Nick Fuentes and what do you actually do that effectively can counter what he does? And what are your expectations of the government to be critical of a person that has that kind of platform?
So for everyone's benefit, the question was, can I comment on Nick Fuentes and what he does? And what are you doing to counter him? And what's the government's role?
By the way, his second name is Joseph, a good Jewish name.
Nick Fuentes' second name is Joseph?
Yes.
Look, his last name is Fuentes. Nick Fuentes is a Hispanic person, okay? And he is an open, unapologetic, racist, homophobe, and more than anything, an anti-Semite. He's a toxic, disgusting person. And yet...
By the way, Nick Fuentes is a Hispanic person. I don't know why that's even relevant, but he's 1/4 Hispanic. His paternal grandfather is Mexican. The rest of his family is white, if that matters. But it seems to do Jonathan Greenblatt. And ironically, if somebody had a paternal grandfather who was Jewish, they would not be considered Jewish. Under Jewish law, under how Israel defines Jews, you're only Jewish if you have a Jewish mother. But in any event, here's the rest of what he says.
Thanks to X and social media, he's been incredibly effective at getting his message out there. I mean, social media is a super spreader of anti-Semitism and hate. And people like Nick Fuentes, they're like patient zero spreading this. And look, it didn't help us when candidate, whatever you'd call him, former President Trump had him over for dinner, like at Mar-a-Lago a few years ago. And it doesn't help us that when given the opportunity, people in positions of power don't renounce this guy. Now look, to his credit, J.D. Vance has done that. But we have this challenge right now on the right, and it's like a good thing because there are bad voices who've been elevated. Like, look, Nick Fuentes is disgusting, Tucker Carlson is disgusting, Candace Owens is disgusting, and so on. But there have been good people like Ted Cruz and Ben Shapiro and Mark Levin.
All right, so in case you're wondering what this is about, if it's not unbelievably obvious, the good people are Ted Cruz, Ben Shapiro, and Mark Levin. And what do they all have in common? They have a single-minded, obsessive, unyielding devotion to the foreign country of Israel. The bad people are Ben Shapiro, are Nick Fuentes, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, and he's soon going to get to Hasan Piker, for whom he evidently harbors the most visceral hatred. And the only thing they have in common is that they're critics of Israel. This is not about anti-Semitism. It's not about racism. It's about whether Americans have the right or not to criticize Israel. And his dividing line, like so many Zionists in the United States, Israel loyalists in the United States, is you're a good person if you worship and revere and serve and devote yourself to the state of Israel, and you're an evil, malicious, disgusting person if you don't.
Who are pushing back on these, Speaker Johnson, pushing back on these revolting lunatics. So to answer the question, I think the only way we are going to defeat the rising anti-Semitism on the right is from the right. I think the only way we're going to defeat the rising anti-Zionism on the left is by people on the left. So what I try to do at ADL, what we try to do, is to provide data, is to provide tools, is to step up, but often quietly behind the scenes. It doesn't help. I don't think it helps the Jewish people, and it doesn't disarm them when I go after Nick Fuentes or Hasan Piker, a revolting person. You should call him Hamas Piker. He's here in LA, and he's just a putrid, says horrible, slanderous things about Jews, about Zionists, about Israel.
I wonder how long ADL had consultants workshopping that. We call him Hamas Piker. So clever. The irony about Hamas Piker is that Hamas Piker never talks about Jews. The idea that he says disgusting things about Jews, I'm sure he says very insulting things about Jewish individuals. But if that makes someone anti-Semitic, it's that whole left liberal framework for that prevailed for so long. If you criticize Hillary Clinton, you're a misogynist. If you criticize Obama, you're racist. If you criticize Jasmine Crockett, as we're seeing a rejuvenation of, then it means you're both misogynist and racist. Not only does Hasan Piker not talk about Jews as a group, when he does, he often goes out of his way. I would suggest sometimes very defensively and performatively. And maybe that's just what you need to do, or you feel like you need to do if you're a person of Turkish descent and Muslim who's criticizing Israel, as opposed to, say, a Jewish person who has a lot more leeway. But not only does he go out of his way to constantly say, this is anti-Semitic, this is, he actually accuses, I think very unfairly and libelously, but he does, people like Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes and Candace Owens of not having any genuine concern for the Palestinian people, but themselves being motivated solely by anti-Semitism, and that's the only reason why they're critical of Israel. I mean, if anybody models the ADL's approach, it's Hasan Piker. But notice he has a particular disdain for Hasan Piker, because I do think that criticism and opposition of Israel from the left is regarded as far more threatening to them. They trust that the American right will serve Israel. They have their Ted Cruz's and Mike Johnson's and Donald Trump's. So anyway, let's continue. I mean, I think there's absolutely nothing remotely anti-Semitic about Tucker Carlson or Hasan Piker. Not even arguable. The only thing they have in common is that they're both critics of Israel and U.S. financing of it. But let's take a look at the rest.
It's a big platform.
Yeah, so you might not know Hasan Piker, but if your kids are watching video games, you better believe they do. Because on Twitch and on Steam, he's everywhere, let alone on YouTube and Insta.
What is Steam? I mean, he is big on Twitch. And also, Hasan Piker doesn't really play video games, I don't think, at least not anymore. He just does political commentary. But in any event.
So anyways, long story short, we definitely are working a lot to try to get the platforms to kind of enforce their own terms of service so that we can pull down the most offensive hate speech or get them to do it. But I need people on the right to take down Tucker Carlson. So I'm trying to help Ted Cruz. I need people on the right to take down Nick Fuentes. So I'm trying to help people like Ben, and same thing on the left.
I do just want to say, when I talked in the sermon about the nuance of every human being and how we're all children, I didn't mean Nick Fuentes.
I guess I was a rabbi saying in his sermon, he was talking about how we're all children of God and all human beings, but he wanted to make clear he doesn't think Nick Fuentes is one. In any event, all of that was fine in the sense that it was just Jonathan Greenblatt spewing venom at people who criticize Israel, at American citizens who dare to question why we're financing Israel. And you can vehemently disagree, as I do, especially with this view that's anti-Semitism. That was all fine. It was at the end when he said, we're working intensively to make sure the platform silence these people. And you notice he was particularly critical of X and heaping scorn on X for being responsible for the fact that Nick Fuentes can be heard. This is what the ADL does. They pretend that they're opposed to racism or bigot, but what they're really about is using the massive power of the pro-Israel lobby, the Jewish lobby, if we're being honest, to censor American citizens off of the internet, out of corporations, bullying corporations to destroy the livelihood of people who criticize Israel. And that last part gave the lie away that this is what the ADL is really all about. Now, this is not a new thing. This is not to start happening since October 7th. The ADL, working with the Israeli government, has been monomaniacally focused on getting laws passed designed to punish social media companies, big tech, if they permit anti-Semitic language. Of course, that includes, as the ADL sees it, any real criticism of Israel or Zionism. Here is a Times of Israel article from 2020. The ADL tells Congress to curb online hate speech if social media giants won't. Appearing before the House Committee, Jonathan Greenblatt says Silicon Valley firms should have tackled anti-Semitism proliferating on their platforms long ago. So it's not just that he's trying to force big tech companies to ban people like Tucker Carlson, Hasan, Piker, Nick Fuentes, whoever criticizes Israel. He wants the Congress, and as you're going to see, he has a lot of influence on Congress. He wants Congress to ban social media platforms or require them to ban and silence and censor and remove people who are critical of Israel. Here's the article that goes on, quote, the head of the Anti-Defamation League told House lawmakers Wednesday to craft legislation. Listen to this. The head of the ADL, it's not like he advocated or suggested or requested. He told House lawmakers Wednesday to craft legislation that would force social media giants to take neo-Nazis and others spewing anti-Semitic hatred off the platforms if the companies won't do so on their own. You just heard, it doesn't just include people who say, oh, Hitler was right, we got to bring back Auschwitz. No, it's a way broader definition of that. It includes people in his mind like Tucker Carlson and Hasan Piker, who are anti-Semitic only if you think criticizing Israel and opposing Israel is anti-Semitic. And he wants Congress to ban them, despite the fact that we actually have a constitution that prohibits that. He goes on, in testimony before the House Committee on Homeland Security, Jonathan Greenblatt said that the rise of anti-Semitic incidents in the United States was due in part to bigoted voices being amplified on Facebook, Twitter, and other websites. It's long overdue for the social media companies to step up and shut down the neo-Nazis on their platform, he told Congress. Companies like Twitter and Facebook need to apply the same energy to protecting vulnerable users that they apply to protecting their corporate profits. I mean, this is stuff that is unbelievably pernicious. But the ADL succeeded in getting lawmakers to carry out their orders. In fact, it was a bipartisan cast that is now introducing something like the Stop Hate Act that would fine social media companies $5 million a day if they permitted what the ADL considers or what some committee considers to be hateful speech, which would obviously mean anti-Semitism and criticism of Israel. Watch this scene here. It's so symbolic. You have two members of Congress, Josh Gottmeyer, a Democrat of New Jersey, a fanatical Israel supporter, and Don Bacon, who is a Republican from Nebraska. And they both come forward to argue for this law, forcing social media companies to remove the speech that the ADL wants. And you see here, Jonathan Greenblatt is standing watching them like some sort of minder or mafia boss. And you see his posture. He's in charge. And he's looking at the members of Congress he owns as they do his bidding. And at one point, they even pay homage to him and express gratitude toward him. Listen, just watch this spectacle. This is how Washington works. This is how censorship is exercised in the United States through the Congress.
This bipartisan legislation will require social media companies to release detailed public reports of violations of their terms of service and to outline how they're addressing these violations, which includes the use of their platforms by terrorist groups. Every day companies fail to report this information, it will result in a $5 million fine. Social media companies can no longer hide the crimes that take place on their platforms, especially when they pose a threat to America's national security. And we're very proud this bill has the backing of the Anti-Defamation League.
I'm so proud. I'm so proud that our censorship bill has the backing of the ADL. It doesn't just have the backing of the ADL. They created the bill and they gave you their marching orders for you to sponsor it. Now you are, while the head of the ADL stands there looking at you with his arms folded in front of him and his chest extended, knowing that he dictates to the American Congress what the limits of the speech rights are of American citizens.
I saw
This is Don Bacon, the Republican from Nebraska.
anti-Semitism for the first time when I was 15 years old. I had good parents who taught me it was wrong, but it left a lasting impression on seeing my first incident as a teenager. And if you're on my social media, you see it every day from people that are responding back with what I consider is clearly anti-Semitic kind of messages on social media. I even saw a article today, it was about me, but talking about we have opposed congressmen who are pro-Zionists, right?
Now, I don't know. I find that maybe I'm being naive here, kind of amazing. They should at least pretend they're doing it on their own without their ADL boss standing next to them, given that they're introducing bills that would limit the speech rights of American citizens when it comes to to Israel and to Jews. But the ADL has been at this for multiple years now. This is their primary project, their top priority, to censor speech rights of American citizens. Here is, I reported on an ADL report in 2024, and you can see at the bottom the ADL tweet, promoted as report anti-Semitic content. So they're telling people, report anti-Semitic content on social media platforms and expect nothing to happen. Research from the ADL Center for Technology and Society shows that 5 major platforms are still failing to enforce their policies. So they're whining that big tech platforms aren't censoring enough content that they consider to be anti-Semitic. Do you understand that they don't want free speech in the United States? They don't believe in it. They don't want criticism of Israel to be freely expressed. They don't want you to be able to talk about the pro-Israel lobby. They consider all of that anti-Semitic. And here is part of the report that I highlighted, quote, social media platforms are still falling far too short when it comes to moderating anti-Semitic and anti-Israel content, said Jonathan Greenblatt, ADL CEO and national director. In the aftermath of the unprecedented Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th, Jewish users are encountering more anti-Semitic slurs and harassment on social media than ever before. It's not hard to detect this hate, but it takes leadership to consistently enforce the rules. I mean, I love the moments when they come out and just stop pretending that they're actually only concerned about anti-Semitic speech. Trying to censor that would be bad enough. But I love the moments when they're candid about the fact that what they're really upset about is anti-Israel speech. You should not, as an American, they believe, be permitted to criticize this foreign country without suffering punishments, either at the hands of big tech or Congress that forces big tech to punish you. It's a legislative project they've been working on. They have people on the march to do it. They've gotten people banned and fired for so long in the United States for the crime of saying things they dislike about Israel. Here's a incident that a lot of people have forgotten, in part because the commentator who was fired by CNN for his anti-Israel comment, Mark Lamont Hill, is unpopular among conservatives, and a lot of them cheered it, even while still pretending to be free speech advocates or anti-cancel culture advocates. But this was in 2018. CNN ends the contract with contributor Mark Lamont Hill after his speech on Israel. The move comes after the Anti-Defamation League and other groups condemned Hill for advocating a boycott. He advocated a boycott of Israel. You're absolutely allowed to do that. He called for Palestine to be free from the river to the sea. You don't have to like that phrase. Americans have the absolute right to express it. but not if you want to work in media, because the ADL can and will get you fired and has done so many times. Now, one of the main obsessions that the ADL has had has been trying to get Tucker Carlson silenced. You just heard at the beginning Jonathan Greenblatt demanding that. When he was at Fox News, the ADL was on a constant crusade aimed at the Murdochs, Fox's advertisers, Fox's affiliates, to try and get Tucker Carlson fired for quote-unquote anti-Semitic speech. They were obsessed with it. Here is an article in the Washington Post. ADL demands Fox News fire Tucker Carlson over anti-Semitic trope. This has deadly significance. This was April 12th, 2021. And then CNN, Brian Stelter in particular, hosted Jonathan Greenblatt because he was so excited to be able to call Tucker Carlson anti-Semite and racist, and to have the ADL blame Fox for tolerating Tucker's anti-Semitism. And Jonathan Greenblatt went on CNN and talked about how Fox is incredibly immoral for keeping Tucker Carlson on the air. Listen to this.
Right? And, you know, people like Lou Dobbs on the Fox network or Glenn Beck before him got great ratings with their wild, racist, and ugly conspiracy theories. So what do we want Fox to do? I mean, first and foremost, Tucker has got to go. Again, I think it is a risk, not just to the corporation.
Do you hear every time they're speaking, they speak in the language of command and imperative? Like when they went before Congress and said the ADL instructed Congress. Here he is saying Tucker has got to go off Fox. Like, who is Jonathan Greenblatt to determine the rules of acceptable discourse in America for Americans? Tucker was the most popular cable host by far in the history of the medium. Americans wanted to watch him, and they were. But because he strays from what the ADL thinks is the proper lines for how you can talk about Israel, now Fox has to fire him, or they'll go after Fox's advertisers and shareholders and affiliates. Yes, that's exactly what they're saying.
It's a risk to our society to be promoting these anti-Semitic and racist myths that literally were used by people on January the 6th to try to not just interfere with the election, but to murder lawmakers. I mean, all
right. So as it turns out, just like Mark Lamont Hill and so many other people the ADL demanded to be fired, Tucker did get fired by Fox News in 2023 at the height of his ratings success. And here's the Times of Israel. ADL hails Fox News for the long-sought ouster of Tucker Carlson. U.S. Group head says TV anchor, who was network's most watched host, used his primetime show to spew anti-Semitic, racist, xenophobic, and anti-LGBT hate to millions. Yeah, the Anti-Defamation League doesn't care about racist, xenophobic, anti-LGBT. You can be as anti-LGBT as you want. Do you see the ADL ever calling for Matt Walsh to be fired by the Daily Wire? One of the most obsessively and psychotically anti-LGBT commentators to exist in American media in a long, long time. Like his obsessive focus. Of course not, because he's not a critic of Israel. They don't care about anti-LGBT or anti-racist speech. I've always said that if Nick Fuentes said everything that he says, but just didn't have the part where he criticizes Israel and the Jewish lobby in the United States, nobody would be upset about Nick Fuentes. There are a lot of people as quote-unquote racist or homophobic as Nick Fuentes. That's not anybody's concern with him. It's always about Israel. And that's why the ADL has celebrated Tucker Carlson's firing, and it's not enough for them. They want him banned from social media. Now, one of the things that I continue to believe is among the most overlooked events in terms of its importance is the fact that the United States took one of the most popular social media apps in the country that 90 million Americans, a third of the country roughly, were choosing voluntarily to use, which was TikTok, by far the most influential and popular among Americans' young people. And originally, back in 2020, people wanted to ban it because they said China controlled it and we don't want Chinese control, but that never went anywhere. The ban on TikTok never got close to being passed when it was just about China. It only gained momentum after October 7th when the Democrats were protesting Israel and turning against Israel because there's too much anti-Israel speech allowed on TikTok, by which they meant that people were seeing the slaughter and massacres that Israel was doing every day in Gaza. Did the White House under Joe Biden and the Democratic Party leadership join with Republicans to say, let's ban TikTok? And everyone admits it was due to Israel and not China. And one of the people who kicked off the ball to ban TikTok was Jonathan Greenblatt, who went on a mission to get TikTok banned, or at least to convince people that TikTok was at the root of all evil. Here he was on Morning Joe in late 2023, talking about how TikTok is ruining America because it's turning people against Israel.
Need to talk about TikTok. TikTok, if you will, it is the 24/7 news channel of so many of our young people, and it's like Al Jazeera on steroids, amplifying and intensifying the anti-Semitism and the anti-Zion with no repercussion.
Again, I'm happy when people say that. We've had a lot of people who come out and said about the TikTok ban, this is because of Israel. And now the sale of TikTok that Donald Trump engineered is being purchased by a consortium led by Larry Ellison, a fanatical Zionist, the largest ever private donor to the IDF, who just bought Paramount and CBS and is quickly turning CBS News into a arm of state TV for Israel. We did a report on that yesterday. Trying to buy Warner Brothers as well and own not just CBS and Paramount and TikTok, but Warner Brothers, the Discovery Network, CNN. There's an incredibly dangerous concentration in the hands of one of the two richest people in the world whose devotion and loyalty is to a foreign country. And the ADL has absolutely been behind this. Several months ago, when Benjamin Netanyahu met with American influencers, who the Wall Street Journal just reported, many of which are being paid to advocate for Israel, Netanyahu said the greatest success in Israel's war, one major part of which is the battle to control social media, was the forced sale of TikTok to Larry Ellison. That's what Netanyahu considers to be one of the greatest successes for Israel. That now American citizens will be severely restricted in what they can say inside their own country on the social media app they were using about Israel, because now it's in the hands of Larry Ellison. They have an IDF soldier, a woman, an American woman who went to Israel, didn't join the American army, which is her country, joined the Israeli army because that's her loyalty. And she's now the head chief censor for all matters relating to Israel and anti-Semitism. If you can't see what's happening here, it's because you don't want to. And the ADL is absolutely at the spearhead of the attempt to censor critics of Israel who have any influence or effect in order to stop the trend of unraveling support for Israel inside the United States. Here's a leaked audio of Jonathan Greenblatt talking about, in Israel, TikTok.
The United States' support for Israel is not left and right. It is young and old. And the numbers of young people who think that Hamas's, massacre was justified is shockingly and terrifyingly high. And so we really have a TikTok problem.
I mean, how many different ways can you hear it? When Jonathan Greenblatt comes out, when any of the pro-Israel lobby groups come out, when any of the Jewish advocacy groups come out and demand censorship of people, we're working to get social media to crack down on Tucker Carlson and Hasan Piker, Nick Fuentes. It shouldn't matter what your politics are or what your views of Israel are. You should be aggressively defiant about the right of the pro-Israel lobby and the ADL and Jonathan Greenblatt to dictate to Americans inside the United States what our speech rights are when it comes to Israel. And no, you don't get to censor people who are critical of the foreign country that you have been trained from infancy to revere and to have ultimate loyalty to. I mean, at least left-wing censorship was ostensibly about protecting Americans. It was completely misguided and authoritarian. But at least the argument was, oh, we're protecting Black people in the United States or trans people in the United States or women, whatever. At least like the theory was we're trying to protect Americans. I was vehemently against that, still am. But I'm just saying this censorship doesn't even have that pretense. It's about censoring Americans for the benefit of another country, a foreign country. This should be revolting. It is utterly un-American and unconstitutional. It's an absolute assault on every right that, according to our founding documents, were guaranteed by God and at least by the Constitution. And the ADL is the spearhead of that. And they're getting desperate. And that's why they just came out today and called for the absolute censorship of people, both on the right and the left, who are among the most popular and influential spokespeople who have nothing in common with one another except that they're critical of Israel.